Nueta Hidatsa Sahnish College held a full-day summit about traditional food and seeds. Crystal Quao headed to Newtown to get a taste of initiatives to help rebuild food sovereignty.
Presenters and speakers like Mike Bartholomew took listeners back to the nation's gardening roots.
There was no specific case of someone just solely making baskets, for example. Everyone was a practitioner in agriculture.
Dr. Ruth Plenty Sweetgrass Shekills is the Food Sovereignty Director at the college and organizer for this work. She says over time, traditional seed varieties have decreased. She says her grandfather told her his vision to see traditional seeds fill gallons.
Part of the work that I do is thinking about my grandfather's words and his wishes for our people and for our seeds.
The Ag Department has a cooperative agreement with the USDA Agricultural Research Service to expand the use of the seeds so it becomes abundant.
Excited about food all the time.
College President Dr. Twyla Baker says she's proud of the Multiplying Project.
Our team does really super important work, groundbreaking work, very quietly though.
Plenty Sweetgrass Shekills says this year the department is working with partners to grow using the seeds on organic farms.
We need to get people to be back in their gardens.
The school's president says they want to eventually collaborate with sister colleges on this endeavor. At NHS College in Newtown, I'm Crystal Quao reporting for your news leader.
The Agricultural Department is also developing micro-credentials for contemporary and traditional seed gardening. That's called the Next Gen Project.